This is Michio Kaku.
Michio Kaku is a professor of theoretical physics and the author of the best-selling book, The Future of Humanity.
And he's here to tell us that the evidence for UFOs is now so overwhelming.
We are now witnessing a tipping point. You see, the burden of proof used to be on the believers to prove that UFOs are real. Now the burden of proof has shifted to the government and the military to prove that they're not real.
Okay, that doesn't make a lick of sense. In that, yes, of course, there will always be some things that some people can't identify. And you call those things unidentified, and if they're flying, then they're unidentified flying objects.
You see, the burden of proof used to be on the believers to prove that UFOs are real.
So, if you're a complete idiot, everything you see in the sky is an unidentified flying object. And speaking of which...
Just this week, the Navy admitted that several UFO videos are in fact real. They cannot be explained.
That is, they can't be explained by Tucker Carlson. So yes, UFOs are real. And the worse you are at actually identifying something, the more UFOs you will see. So these were the UFOs that I recorded earlier. This one, of course, is an insect, and this is a flock of birds flying by. And you might think, no, that's crazy. No one could possibly mistake birds or insects for UFOs. No, way back when I was looking into why the SpaceX rocket blew up on the pad, and would you believe it, a poll on a British newspaper actually has the majority of people voting for, yep, you guessed it, aliens. Or be in the comments section. You don't have to go far to find things like this.
You know, bugs don't travel in straight lines. Or way through the looking glass here, people.
Well, you might think that that's actually been photoshopped in there, but it hasn't. There really is a UFO on the SpaceX video just before the rocket explodes. That is a unidentified flying object. Well, except for that frame. That was photoshopped. But ignoring that, the rest is actually real. Now, it's amazing at NASA launch pads just how many UFOs there are. So as remarkable as it may sound, there are at least 3 of these unidentified flying objects around the SpaceX rocket before it blew up. And who, of course, can forget that close call when NASA totally had to call off a launch because of the presence of a 200-meter tall spider attacking the space shuttle.
And they show aerial phenomenon that baffles everyone.
These are small, but the ones out there are far away.
Baffles everyone, including people who know a lot about it, who's looked at them.
Not quite true. They're actually very easy to identify. But I can see that if you actually said, here's a picture of a bird in a plane, probably wouldn't pull in several million views on YouTube. And just so we're absolutely clear, if you saw this in the sky, this wouldn't be a UFO because you would know what it was. You know, if aliens actually arrived on Earth, they wouldn't be UFOs once you know what they are. You see, all of this follows the US Navy releasing 3 pieces of footage of UFOs showing flight characteristics that no one could explain. So today, let's take a look at all 3 of these amazing pieces of evidence of things that no one can explain.
But these must just be weather balloons, right?
Well, the weather balloons that are expressing technologies that are far beyond our current understanding of aerodynamics.
The range to the object coming up as about 4 miles, which means since you know the field of view of the camera, you can work out that the object is about 1 meter long, about the size of a decent bird.
Things that are maneuvering in ways that no aircraft that we are currently aware of has that capability.
Unless, of course, you actually looked at it or thought about the numbers or did some elementary calculations, then you would come to the conclusion that the first one was a duck or something. It's flying about 3 kilometers up, 10,000 odd feet, and the apparent motion is mostly due to the fact that the plane is flying about half the speed of sound and the duck isn't.
But the evidence is overwhelming. We have all this information from U.S. Navy pilots. We now have metrics. We can actually measure how fast they travel, how high they are, what kinds of centrifugal forces that they can experience. And science, remember, is based on things that are testable, reproducible, and falsifiable. Now we have testable information. A game changer.
Oh man, this professor.
So given what we know about their physical behavior, but the physics involved in the way these aircraft fly, what do you think the chances are they were created by human beings?
Well, I think there's only two alternatives left now.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go ahead and suggest that you've not actually looked at the data on this.
One is perhaps they are hypersonic drone vehicles. After all, the Russians, the Chinese, and the U.S. are experimenting with hypersonic drones.
Yeah, I'm going to love seeing how you square a hypersonic drone being overtaken by a plane traveling about half the speed of sound.
That can travel between 5 and 20 times the speed of sound.
So why is this dumb on almost every level? Because it's incongruent with the data on almost every level. Hypersonic craft basically are spacecraft. And let me just tell you what I mean by that. The reasons that the planes fly so high is because the atmosphere is much thinner up there. There is less drag, less resistance, so you can fly further for the same fuel. Of course, you can't go too high, otherwise you run out of oxygen. And of course, if you go all the way up to space, there is zero resistance, but there is also zero oxygen up there, which you could use as an oxidant for your fuel. So most commercial planes fly up at about 10 kilometers in altitude, about the same height as Mount Everest, where there's only about 1/3 of the atmosphere left. The hypersonic craft start almost at twice that altitude, where you're now down to sort of 1% of the atmosphere, and they go all the way up to about 70 kilometers, where there's basically no atmosphere left at all. And you go higher than that, of course, and you end up in space, where there is zero resistance, but also zero oxygen to use as fuel, which means that if you want to get thrust up there, you've got to take the oxygen with you. You fly at hypersonic speeds through the lower atmosphere, it can tell you exactly what's going to happen. Your craft is going to heat up and melt. Because of compressional heating, there is no way around it. And of course, it's going to experience huge drag because of that. Hell, you can get a reasonable idea of the compressional heating that you can get just from the re-entry profiles of craft coming in from orbit. Orbital velocity is 20 odd times the speed of sound, and you've got to decelerate to zero basically in about half an hour, and that gets pretty warm. You try going into the lower atmosphere quickly, the G-forces will kill the people in your craft, and your craft will melt. Thankfully, in this case, it's kind of a moot point because this particular hypersonic unmanned avian vehicle, which was most certainly not made by a man, is probably of the quack variety, often found on the planet Omicronian Beta.
One is perhaps they are hypersonic drone vehicles. After all, the Russians, the Chinese, and the U.S. are experimenting with hypersonic drones that can travel between 5 and 20 times the speed of sound.
The second video related to the amazing Tic Tac incident. You know, this had all sorts of amazing first-person accounts of a strange Tic Tac object engaging in hypersonic flight.
Suddenly, the object begins to rise into the air. And it has no wings. As the dogfight unfolds, he quickly turns and dives to bring his jet's nose ahead of the object to close the distance. Suddenly, the tic-tac rockets past. It's gone beyond the horizon in the blink of an eye.
Now, there's a general pattern with UFO sightings, and that's utterly remarkable stories, backed up by utterly unremarkable evidence. But it's got to be said, as evidences go, this one is even more unremarkable than normal. You want to see the evidence for all of these supernatural flight movements that this is based on? This is it. And I'm afraid it gets even worse than that if you actually do an analysis of the video and understand what you're actually looking at. So I've done a little augmented reality just to show you what's going on here. So on the top there, you've got the most important bit, which is, is the camera pointing to the left or to the right? There you've got roughly the cockpit, which is the direction the plane is going. It turns out it's not, it's slightly to the left. Don't worry about that too much. But the map that you have here is about real size. So the size of the moon and the size of the field of view of the camera is about right. So when he zooms in a factor of 2, you get half the field of view. And when he zooms out, then you get about twice the field of view. So at the moment, he's got about 3/4 of a degree of field of view. So you can see the size of the object relative to the moon. Now, the top camera assumes that the pod is tracking perfectly, and the bottom one assumes that the object stays in the middle of the field of view. So about now, when there's a little spasm, you get some idea of, just how little the pod had to twitch in order to keep the tracking. So that's when it almost loses the tracking on the object for the first time. Now, towards the end, what you'll see is he drops out to a wide field of view, then zooms straight back in, which is where the video cuts off. But what I want you to do is pay attention to the bottom video, which assumes that the camera pod just stops moving and you see that the object just moves out of the field of view as would be expected. So all of the eyewitness accounts say it had no engines and no signs of propulsion.
Can you talk us through the technology that you witnessed?
If you can imagine a 47-foot-long tic-tac, they didn't have any wings, they didn't have any propulsion system.
Whereas the infrared shows it's clearly hot, kind of like plane engines or something. All the accounts say it was maneuvering violently and hypersonically, whereas the actual video shows it making no maneuvers whatsoever. And the plane, far from chasing down anything, is in straight level flight the whole time.
Weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. I chased a UFO.
And only at the very end is there a slight twitch in the camera mount.
But the evidence is overwhelming.
And I've got to say, I'm super impressed by how much people sensationalized your slightly twitchy camera mount.
When one of the ship's fighter jets engaged a strange object in the sky, capturing footage of the incident on its infrared camera.
This is not some crazy person with their cell phone on Instagram, right? This is a $15 billion aircraft carrier with its radar systems.
Oh yeah, that's right. Just because a nuclear aircraft carrier is really, really expensive, that must mean that it can't make mistakes. Like run aground or something. Or because a government program is spending lots of money on something, that means it must be real, right? I mean, you remember Operation Stargate, where the Pentagon spent some $20 million working out that people weren't psychic. Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about some crazy person on the street. We're talking about a Pentagon-funded program with $20 million of funding.
Look at it this way. Think of how stupid the average person is, and then realize half of them are stupider than that.
And it's stunning just how many people parrot these remarkable claims based on no evidence whatsoever.
Speaking directly to the press with the permission of the military about their encounters with flying saucers.
We have all this information from U.S. Navy pilots.
That's right. In fact, one pilot even said that he was in a near collision with a UFO.
Wow, I bet there's some super impressive video of that.
And they do all sorts of maneuvers that they've never seen before. We're talking about zigzagging without exhaust. We're talking about withstanding G-forces of perhaps 400 times the force of gravity, which would be enough to crush any living organism.
Yes, gone are the days of blurry photos. Now we have evidence of amazing maneuvers by unidentified craft.
And the ability to rocket from zero practically up to 5 to 7 times the speed of sound. We're talking about hypersonic velocities that leave our jets in the dust.
What the hell are you talking about? The best video evidence for the hypersonic flight is the Tic Tac incident, which is actually a slightly twitchy cameraman. That's the best video evidence for all of these remarkable claims. At which point, you're just going to be honest. What separates this from your regular UFO sighting? Is it that Lieutenant Fravor here is a pilot or something? I mean, in both cases, it is remarkable claims.
Weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. I chased a UFO.
With utterly unremarkable evidence. In fact, it's kind of the UFOologists themselves who drive the final nail home on this one by claiming that this is one of the best, most powerful pieces of evidence for...
Look at this. It's incredible.
It is absolutely... There it goes.
Look at that.
We're about to see the Tic Tac UFO incident account, which is, in my opinion, one of the most credible UFO accounts that there is.
No, it's not. It's basically your standard UFO sighting.
Saw figures standing behind the windows on this craft. They were dressed in black, shiny uniforms, and he described them as being, quote, somehow not human.
And they felt this sort of feeling come over them, and then they woke up and realized they'd lost 2 hours of time.
Oh, how much did you guys have? I don't know. We made brownies, and I think we're dead. I really do. Okay, how much did you put in the brownies? Down in front of me. Time is going by really slow.
And then they woke up and realized they'd lost 2 hours of time. He ran towards the car because a red beam of light came out of this spaceship, and he ran towards the car, said to Betty, we need to get out of here, we need to get out of here. And there was a noise, a sound.
Out of the way, Dopey!
And at that point, the car started to vibrate. She and Barney heard a series of buzzing sounds striking the trunk of the car. And suddenly, they found themselves in a new location.
But wait, this amazing encounter comes with more than just eyewitness testimony and video evidence. It comes with physical evidence.
Betty's dress was torn in several locations. There was a 2-inch tear in the zipper fabric, the stitching at the top of her dress, a 1-inch tear in the thick zipper fabric. The dress was torn from waist to hemline, and the hem was torn down on one side.
Yes, these aliens that had mastered interstellar travel were somehow amazed by the fabric in a dress.
Zipper on her dress was broken. His shoes were in such a mess that he had to throw them away.
Oh, and of course, a guy's shoes. It seems that all of these stories about these aliens from 5 billion worlds.
So we have 2 game changers. We now realize that there could be over 1 billion Earth-like planets in our own backyard, and we can now measure the velocity of these objects. They travel between Mach 5 and Mach 20.
Seriously, you're on a planet where no meteor can come and hit the Earth without going viral on 1,000 security cameras or dash cams. Yet, somehow, aliens remarkably visit here regularly. But they only make their remarkable maneuvers near the only US Navy pilots who can't actually operate a camera. Which brings us on to the last of these great evidences for UFOs, which I'm going to be honest, is by far the most interesting of the 3. Now, I gotta stress at this point that when I first came onto this, I was confronted by people saying, oh, there are three amazing pieces of footage from fighter pilots. There's no way you can debunk all of them. These things defy the laws of physics. Then when I debunked the first one, it was all like, well, that guy's a fighter pilot who flies $1,000,000 aircraft, and you're some guy on the internet. I know who I'm going to trust. Well, honestly, I would have rather hoped you would have trusted the evidence that was actually on the screen.
We now have metrics. We can actually measure how fast they travel, how high they are, what kinds of centrifugal forces that they can experience.
And none of these three objects show even remarkable flight characteristics. In fact, none of them show any signs of even supersonic flight, let alone hypersonic flight. Now, with this last piece of video called Gimbal, there is audio on this video, and you get several really useful things from the audio.
Dude, there's a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude.
So two critically important things there. First of all, they show up on radar. That is, they're made of something that's radio reflective, like, say, for instance, metal. Secondly, they're going against the wind. Cool, so what have we got on the display? Well, again, it's in the infrared, and black is hot. So whatever this object is, it's hot. Now, you don't have to pay too much attention to the shape of the object, because it's just an optical effect from the object being very bright, and it's essentially glare. And the apparent rotation, it's an effect of the gimbal mount, which again, I'll explain later. So the most interesting thing is, it's hot, there's a lot of them, and they're all traveling in the same direction against the wind. But we only ever see this one. A whole lot of metal objects traveling on a parallel course against the wind. A whole lot of hot objects traveling against the wind. A whole lot of hot metal objects that show up on radar. What's made of metal? Traveling in a straight line. And they're going to be hot. Let me think. What could that possibly be? Well, it can't be a plane, because then there wouldn't be lots of them, and they wouldn't all be traveling in a straight line. And they can't be birds, because those wouldn't show up on radar, and they wouldn't be hot like this. Well, there's a lot of them, and they're just traveling in a straight line. That doesn't sound like it's it doesn't sound like it's trying to get anywhere. It's more kind of like maybe a debris field or something. But what would a debris field be doing up in the sky? There's no possible way that you could get a load of really hot pieces of metal in the sky traveling in the same direction. It's got to be aliens. Yeah, it certainly fulfills all the criteria of a large rocket. Sort of booster or a satellite or something like that, re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. You know, either from orbital velocity or near orbital velocity. You see, orbital velocity is about 20 times the speed of sound, and by the time you get down to this sort of part of the atmosphere, you're slowed down to merely about the speed of sound, and that generates quite a lot of heat. And if you assume it's coming in at a fairly shallow angle, which is fairly common for things that have, they've just clipped the atmosphere, they've slowed down, they all come in on this sort of re-entry type profile, then by the time they get down to the sort of altitude where these planes are flying, they'll be traveling at about the speed of sound. And a debris field that would show up wonderfully on radar.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
But of course, most of the pieces would be quite small, and they would be very difficult to see. Now, it's not a perfect explanation in that the plane is basically in level flight here, and the object doesn't appear to be falling that much. Again, you've got to be a little skeptical in that only 35 seconds of video is released, and it cuts off just as it's about to get interesting. But hey, this object has got plenty of kinetic energy. You can essentially skate along the atmosphere, essentially surfing on the more viscous part of the atmosphere until you lose that kinetic energy. And once you lose that kinetic energy through viscous drag, you essentially sink into the lower atmosphere. Now, this is, of course, exactly what heat shields do. If you would come straight in with your heat shield, you basically vaporize your spacecraft. And, of course, the G-forces kill the crew. However, if you spread that orbital interface over a period of, almost half an hour, then the re-entry surfaces get hot, which is where you're dumping the energy, but they don't melt. And the G-forces don't kill the crew. But if you recall in my previous video, where I showed a UFO activating an infrared cloaking device, which turned out just to be a plane coming into land. Trust me, I'm the one who filmed it, okay? Now, if I'd have just cut the video there and claimed this was a UFO operating an infrared cloaking device, it's exceptionally doubtful that anyone would have been able to contest that. However, if I release all of the footage, it becomes very clear that all you're looking at is a plane that is reflective in the infrared. Which brings us on to the more interesting question of why does this Department of Defense released video, leaked video, cut off at exactly the point where you're about to identify the object? The plane is banking around and it ends up when it's just about heading directly towards the object to get a nice close-up view of it, at which point the video cuts off. Now let's just assume for a second here that whoever leaked these videos wanted people to have the best evidence for UFOs. Sorry, aircraft with technology beyond our understanding of the laws of physics. Why didn't they release the next 30 seconds when the aircraft would have flown straight past this object, rather than this ambiguous 30 seconds while they're not entirely certain what they're looking at? Maybe the most obvious reason is the next 30 seconds kind of dispels the bubble of the whole thing. You know, it goes from what the hell is that to it becoming bloody obvious what it is. You know, it's a duck or a balloon or a distant plane or what? Dang man, it's a rocket booster. That's so cool. Seriously, why does the footage cut off at the exact moment when our F-18 pilot have banged around just far enough that they're flying straight at this object? Wow, that's so convenient. There's also the question of why the object is called gimbal and why the object rotates. Well, it's called gimbal because the camera is mounted on a gimbal. So this is the infrared camera mounted up on a gimbal mount, and if I get the cameras pointing at each other, there you go, that's the infrared camera pointing directly at the regular camera. And when it's locked up like this, you'll see that I can rotate the axis that it's mounted on, and it keeps pointing in the same direction. So on the plane, you'll have an axis, a gimbal mount very much like this one. And also you can rotate it up on whatever axis you want. So you can tilt the camera all the way over like this, and it still sort of stays matched. Or we can just come back to reset, and yeah. So that's basically how the camera is mounted. So there's a couple of things. First of all, the object being imaged is so much hotter than the environment, so much infrared brighter than the rest of the environment, that there's a lot of glare that comes off it, which obscures the actual real shape of the object. This is fairly normal with the infrared video type thing. Awesome. So this is just to give you an idea of some of the optical artifacts that you can get off thermal cameras. Now, it's got to be said that my thermal camera is no slouch. It's actually pretty expensive, but it's still not a patch on their thermal camera, which is probably a few millions to a few tens of millions more expensive than mine. But mine, of course, is more geared up as a scientific instrument. So, whereas theirs is more rapid access, auto setup, image processing, all that sort of thing. So what are we looking at? Well, that's actually me. It's the reflection of me in a piece of glass. Piece of glass is actually a mirror, but it wouldn't make any difference at all to the thermal camera. Right? So it's basically the reflective properties of glass that you're looking at there, and that is the computer which is currently running the thermal camera. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take an inanimate carbon rod. Yes, that self-same inanimate carbon rod, and I'm going to heat it up with a blowtorch. So there's the blowtorch. There is the inanimate carbon rod. Now, the thermal range that I've got at the moment is excellent for seeing things like this. However, if I put a very wide thermal range on it, you will see that it's not so good for imaging stuff. In fact, I can put the full thermal range on there and everything becomes very flat. So you usually select the thermal range to give you the best contrast. Now you can see with the thermal camera that they've got, their thermal range is more geared up to seeing things like clouds and the such like. It's not got a wide thermal range. It's a relatively narrow thermal range, which means that if you're going to try and image hot things, you're going to run into problems. And those are the sorts of problems that I'm about to show you. So yeah, get your inanimate carbon rod and yeah, put it in a blowtorch for a few seconds. And when you take it out, I mean, even now you can see these are electronic artifacts. Yeah, if there's too many numbers, it kind of overspills into the row somehow. So that's an electronic artifact. And also, you'll notice that the shape of the rod has changed. It's got all this glare on it. And the pixels, you'll notice, they're over value. So even there's a burnout problem here. And even if I put the thermal range up to maximum, there's still a burnout problem. The shape that you're seeing isn't the actual true shape of the object. And this is just, it's a glare problem. Then there's the apparent rotation of the object, which is again an artifact of the axes that the camera gimbal is mounted up on, not sharing all of its axes with the window on the front of the pod. Now, I could describe this in some detail, but it's already been done basically perfectly by another YouTuber, a Mick West.
Back of the gimbal-mounted camera system. This is all a bit confusing, so I made several videos explaining it.
And I'll leave links to his channel below, because he's done some awesome videos on this.
The gimbal craft, it's been recently analyzed, it's FLIR. Not only does it's definitive that it's not a conventional anything by its movements, but there's a pocket of cold air around a propulsion source.
Why is there a glow around this dog in this thermal camera footage? Why is there a glow around this dancing girl? Or around this guy? It even made the New York Times, described there as a glowing aura.
So, sorry, Professor, but if the best evidence that you have for planes with hypersonic flight characteristics beyond anything that we have, or from aliens from 5 billion different worlds, are a bird, a plane, and a piece of space junk, I'm not entirely certain this has shifted the burden of proof anywhere. Unless, of course, being ignorant is actually evidence for aliens.
What that tells me, if black is hot, there's a cold region. You typically are going to be, warm coming out of the exhaust or near your engine or whatever.
Doesn't that argue that it's not a conventional propulsion system?
So no, the glow around the gimbal UFO is not evidence of advanced alien technology. It's the sharpening in the camera cranked up to 11.
Hell, in all likelihood, the only reason these were declassified recently by the Department of Defense was because they were getting so many Freedom of Information requests for the footage. So why do stories like this get so much press, while the stories debunking them go by largely unnoticed? Well, honestly, I think a lot of it is fairly simple. People like to think that they're discovering something secret, something that a big organization has put a lot of effort in keeping from them. It makes them feel good, it makes them feel clever. And realistically, the opposite is also true. When you come up to someone who is a committed believer and you show them what the actual evidence that they think supports this is, and that really there's nothing there. Yeah, it's pretty human that they're going to be offended by that. It's one of those sunken cost fallacy type things that they've spent so long wanting to believe that they're committed to believing no matter what the evidence. Sorry boys, this ain't that kind of video. If you think the grainy video of what appears to be a bird, a plane, and possibly, if you're lucky, a piece of space junk, all edited to be as cryptic and unrevealing as possible, that's not good evidence for UFOs or aliens or any sort of moving goalpost stuff like that. Nor does the fact that it was filmed by an F-18 make it any more credible. And if you think it is, then I hear there's this incredible free water from air device that's just come out of Berkeley recently that you might want to invest in. So if you enjoyed that, drop a thumbs up on it for the shattered dreams of 1,000 people who wanted to believe. Sorry guys, I wish it were true too. It's just reality disagrees on the subject. Hit the notification bell if you don't want to miss out on new uploads like this one. And if you really like this channel, you can either support it by visiting my Amazon store below where you'll find things like gimbals, or of course you can support this channel directly through Patreon. And if you really like my stuff, you can always visit my other channel where it's much more casual and relaxed, where I discuss things like Venus and what air looks like at a nanoscopic level and the coronavirus and all sorts of other stuff. And thanks for watching.